Yeah, I'm here to talk about nonviolent communications. One of my favorite topics. If you've come to some of my sessions before, I love exploring communication and how we connect as humans and how we just get better and better at communicating. So I consider this to be a really important topic. And just as people are kind of joining the room, I'm just wondering, like, how many people here, let's practice our emojis. Let's practice some emojis. How many people here have heard of NVC? So choose any emoji, because there's actually no negative connotated emojis in Zoom. If you've noticed that, they're all positive. So just choose any emoji if you've heard of NVC or nonviolent communication. I just want to get a sense of kind of like, are people familiar with this or not? Okay, yeah, so some of you, great, yeah. And don't mind me as I like move your faces around, and I like to see faces. So yeah, this is, some of you are familiar, some of you, this is newer. So looking forward to kind of sharing and diving into it. So just to check in, how many people here would really like a session, another session? There's been a few that have done this already. How many people here would like another session that once you're done, you can immediately transfer it into use, like right after the session? Just another emoji. If you haven't picked another favorite, like how many people are like, yeah, it'd be really great if I came out of a session and I could just start using it right away. Yeah, right, great. So in saying that, what I'm hearing is, I am so committed and invested in practicing this during this session that I can walk out of here and use it right away. So so great, thank you for that. I love that commitment. We're going to go through kind of what it is, a high level, the pieces, and then we're going to spend a lot of time practicing, because what really happens with communication is when we haven't been practicing our whole lives doing it this way, we've got habits that make it harder if we're not going to actually spend time practicing to relearn new things. So we'll spend a lot of time practicing. So let's get started. Ready? Okay, so we've got nonviolent communication. It's considered a language of life. It was created by Marshall B. Rosenberg in the 1960s. He's heavily influenced by Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, and really centers around universal needs. So the human universal needs. And we heard Dr. Laura Gallagher talk about some universal foundational elements of human, with competence and likability and significance. And you'll find some of those words hidden inside of our universal needs that we'll be touching on today. So there's different models, but the essence of human needs. It's really neat if you're interested in exploring how Marshall Rosenberg has used some of how he's used nonviolent communication in different use cases. He's brought warring countries together to be able to negotiate and come to agreements using the model of nonviolent communication. So whether you're working with your partner, you're working with your kids, I'll talk about how that happens in my family, whether you're working in your teams, with your parents, with your siblings, or you're working with in your communities, this model can show up and be really useful. Because what we're really talking about here is getting really good at listening for what someone is needing and asking for what you need, right? That sounds really simple. So it's like, oh, I got that, Tracy, no problem. Except how many times have you been in a conversation and you've actually skirted around a topic? You know, you haven't actually asked for what you needed in any given moment, right? I know that I'll be like, I did it this morning with my daughter when she's called me out. She's like, you didn't ask for what you need, so I'm not getting you coffee. When I was like, man, I don't talk to anyone before I've had coffee, Fia. And she's like, you didn't ask for what you need. So many times we don't ask for what we need, and then we don't get it, and then we get frustrated because of it. Or how many times have you been in a meeting where you notice the conversation just kind of like going off topic, and inside you're like, oh, this is frustrating because I really want to get through this agenda, or I really want to cover these topics, and you don't say anything. And so you leave feeling frustrated. Or another example of when you're in a conversation with someone and you just notice that they're having some sort of reaction, as Dr. Laura Gallagher would say, a physiological reaction. And you can notice it happening. There's something going on, they're triggered, and they're not saying anything. And they're not asking for what they need. They're just sensing something, right? So we're not really that great at communicating this way, at asking for what we need and at hearing what other people need. These are the types of things that we're going to be talking about today. All right, so what is NVC really? What is it? So it's a way of communicating that allows us to connect authentically. And authentic connection really, really matters. If you want to impact someone, if you want to have an impact or influence on someone, you have to be able to connect with them. You cannot change what you can't connect to. So the ability to authentically connect is really, really important of the leadership journey, which is just a lifelong process of self-discovery if you're kind of enjoying that this week. So it's a way of communicating that allows us to connect authentically. It also helps us to create an environment where psychological safety exists, right? Because when we're communicating this way, we're enforcing an environment of trust, building it and maintaining trust in relationships. This is the one that changed the landscape for me, especially being a parent of 3 daughters and out in community and doing nonprofit work in school too, and at work. Like the authentic understanding of each other, when you're really understanding what is happening for someone else and having someone understand you. I use this all the time with my 15-year-old daughter when she will, we'll be talking very serious conversations as she's moving into an adult, and I'll ask, like, can you just, would you be willing to tell me what you just heard me say? I want to make sure that she's understood me. So would you be willing to tell me what you just heard me say? And I can tell you the number of times that 15-year-old did not hear what I was saying. So many times. So, but being able to come to that authentic understanding of each other using this model. It's also a tool for dealing with conflict. Healthy teams have healthy conflict. If you're not having conflict in your team, there's something that's missing. Different ideas, different opinions, right? And there's ways to do it in a way that's healthy. Yeah, so very, very useful for dealing with conflict. It's also a method for making assertive requests. So to get what you want, for asking for things, to ask for what you need and increase the likelihood that you'll get what you want. So we talked a lot about defensiveness yesterday. This is actually one of those steps before that of when you're communicating from this authentic place in a way that's creating connection and understanding, you're actually like one step behind creating defensiveness. We'll talk a little bit more about that too. So when you think of these things, you think of connecting authentically, understanding, building trust, dealing with conflict, being able to ask for what you need. Just start thinking about, like, what are some scenarios in your life where NVC would be useful, right? So just start thinking of that. Like maybe think through some that have happened this week where, man, if you were able to just better understand what they were trying to say, it would have been really useful. And it's helpful to start to jot them down because you'll start to make sense of, like, oh, okay, because NVC isn't meant to be the only way you communicate. We're not gonna, this method is not the only language you will use. You're not gonna show up in NVC mode in every single conversation. That would be super, super strange. So recognizing when it can be useful and when it's not necessary is also helpful. Okay, what it's not though, it is not passive. It's not turning the other cheek, and it's not some laissez-faire attitude of I don't care. It's coming from a place of feelings and needs and asking for what you need. All right. So some people call it a process or a 4-step process. I really like to think of it as parts of 4 parts. But let's get into what we're really talking about here. It's not, try not to think of it as a formula, as like a 1, 2, 3, 4 step process. It includes these 4 pieces. And actually they may sound familiar to some of you if you've done, how many people here just, let's do another emoji of like have done crucial conversations. Let's see here. Okay, yeah, great. Yeah, so some of this you're gonna notice, yeah, lots, awesome. And if you haven't, you really should. So if you didn't put up an emoji, I'm gonna suggest you go to iqmetrix.com and register for crucial conversations or request Clayton to come into your team. But what you'll notice is that there's a lot of overlap because this model of showing up in a conversation really works. So what we're talking about is, what do I observe? Observations with no judgment and no criticism. We'll talk about why we're not really good at this. What am I feeling? So hurt, scared, joyful, amused, excited, thrilled. What needs do I have in relation to those feelings that I've identified? So there's a connection there. And then what requests can I make in a language that can be acted on, that's not a demand, and that's going to further enrich my life or get me what I need to help me be more successful. So 4 parts to it: observations, feelings, needs, and requests. And we're going to spend some time on each of these areas before we're going to pop into practice. Okay, so 4 areas, we're going to get to know them really well. So what this looks like as an example, and this is very formulaic. So we're going to start from a template, but it will be styled to meet your needs later. So when I hear you use the words, this is our #1 priority. So that's the observation. I am hearing specific words. When I hear you use the words, this is our #1 priority, that's an observation. I feel confused. That's the impact, the feeling. Because I need clarity in why we're doing what we're doing. That's the need. Clarity is a universal need. Would you be willing to share what you were meaning when you said this is our #1 priority? A request that will get you what you need in a moment. I notice something. See what's happening here? I'm noticing attention. I'm feeling confused. I'm noticing some response, and then I'm checking in to find out, like, what doesn't land right. It's like, oh, right, I don't get it. And I want to understand. I have a need to understand, right? I have a need for clarity. It could be any needs, that a whole series of needs that are in there. But I can share the impact, even why I'm impacted that way, and then I can ask for what I need in a moment. Now, like I mentioned, it's most likely that this language doesn't sound like anything that you would ever say. When I hear you say these words, I feel, because I need, would you be willing? But think of it as a template, and you'll play around with language that feels more natural. Okay, so you'll work with and develop your own style. When I'm coaching people to develop or to come up with ways that they can communicate maybe a difficult conversation, and we'll start with the formula, because it's easier to come from a formula where you could adopt to your style. And people be, Tracy, I don't talk like that. Yeah, I know, it's okay. Let's start here. And then we can adopt it to what would you say if this is what you were trying to express? Or like my kids say it better. They're just like, Mom, no one talks like that. They tell me that all the time, but actually I do at home, which is why they tell me no one talks like that. So you'll figure out your own words, but think of it in terms of like these 4 parts. Okay, but there is a reason that NVC isn't practiced regularly. Why it's not something that we're all showing up doing. And it's because it requires some skill development. And most adults haven't spent time practicing thinking, listening, and communicating in this way. And as humans, we were talking about the human condition and how we're complex and these things come up. And as humans, we have some things going against us. One is that we're really, really terrible at separating observation from evaluation. We actually make sense of the world by assigning a meaning to it really quickly, right? By when we see text on a screen, we're already giving it tone. How many times have you like got a Slack message and maybe you're grumpy, or you got a lot of irritating things happening, and someone sends you a Slack message and you assign a tone to it. It's just black text on a screen. It doesn't need to have a tone. But as humans, we do that to make sense of the world, right? So we'll get into more of this later. But so we're really terrible at like having an observation without evaluating it, without assigning meaning. We're also really, really bad at differentiating feeling from thinking. Just by an emoji again. Well, I'll go back a slide. So for an emojis again here, how many people are familiar with like don't start with you, because that will create defensiveness. Start with I. Start with I feel. That's how good communication works, right? Have you heard that? Yeah, a few of you, yeah, right? It's like start with I feel, I statements, because it's softer and it won't create that defensiveness, which is true. So then we think, I feel that you should. I feel that you shouldn't have done that. I know lots of feelings. I feel excited, I feel happy, I feel thrilled, I feel amused, I feel angry, but I feel that you is not a feeling. So often we'll go and put these words, which are actually just thoughts, and think that they're feelings. So we're really, really bad at connecting to our own feelings. So that's 2 things against us. Third, we don't think in terms of feelings and needs, right? We're not really taught how to like check in with like, what's the underlying needs? Why is this so important? I I loved what Dr. Laura Gallagher said yesterday of like, what the problem I have with you is really about me, and trying to understand what is the need that's not being met. Most of our behavior, I would say all of our behavior, I would argue, comes from us meeting our own needs. We're doing something because it meets our needs, but we're not really good at understanding what are those needs and being present and connected to it. We don't really go through education or any training that says like, oh, well, these are the universal human needs. So, you know, when you make this, or when you make this choice or do this thing, which one of needs are your highest priority that you're meeting? We're not really taught that. So that's 3 things. The other one is we're really terrible for asking for what we want. You know, in some societies, Western, we're really bad at like, we don't, you know, sometimes we don't want to like sound too demanding. Sometimes we don't want to like be too, you know, we're just like, I don't want to be too assertive. I don't want to come across too aggressive. Maybe that's a bigger fear. But we're really bad at asking for what we want. And if we are good at asking for what we want, sometimes we do it when we're really trying to get someone to do something out of guilt or shame or fear or obligation, right? We're not really great at asking for what we want in a way that enriches the connection, in a way that's about compassionate giving. You know, if someone knew that they could make your life better and why it was important to you, they'd probably just do it because it feels good to give, and they wouldn't need to do it out of obligation. So these are 4 of the things. Imagine being in a conversation that wasn't meeting your need for understanding, right? So you're with someone and it's not meeting your need for understanding, and just being able to say like, I notice I'm feeling discouraged because this conversation isn't meeting my need for understanding. I really want you to know what I'm saying. And would you be willing to slow down so that we can better understand each other? I know it sounds crazy, and I'm going to talk about these skills emphasize personal responsibility, right, for our actions and the choices we make when we're responding to others, as well as how we can contribute to relationships. So within our team, across teams, within our communities, with our families, how we can contribute to relationships based in cooperation and collaboration. In this really complicated time we're in, getting really good at the ability to communicate, to collaborate, to be understood, to ask for what you need. It's really, really important for the success of teams, for the success of companies, for the success of communities. In case you haven't, I'm super passionate about better communication to improve connection. When I found myself working in IQ University alongside the hugely brilliant Clayton, I was noticing that our conversations like when we were talking, I would just leave feeling really, really frustrated. It was just this worst feeling. I just didn't feel like he understood what I was trying to say. So we'd be in a conversation, we're, working through like what IQU is going to be, what things are going to look like. And it was so frustrating. And this is a guy that I recognized as being really, really important to my own growth, like because he thought so differently from me, being able to like connect, I felt was important, and also really important to the success of IQU because we work together. And if we don't know how to communicate, that's going to be a problem. And also it just feels really, really shitty to leave a conversation and feel like it was just full of resistance, no understanding, and frustration on both sides. So after a few like conversations where I was starting to be like, oh man, like this isn't good. We are in this one particularly frustrating conversation. You just feel it, like it gets stuck, right? You're just stuck and you're not getting where you want to go. And I just pulled into what was happening. I felt like just frustrated, and I was noticing that physiological response, and I pulled into it and I just said, Clayton, can we just slow down for a minute? And I said, I'm noticing that I'm feeling really, really frustrated. And I have a story that this shouldn't be this hard. I really, really want to understand what you're saying, and I'm having a hard time. And I really want us to be better at this because I think it matters. Would you be willing to share what you're experiencing? And what happened was that Clayton didn't have to pretend that our conversations weren't super frustrating for him too. He got to open up and be like, yeah, like I just feel like you don't hear what I'm saying. And it's like, yeah, me too. And we spent time on these friction points that we were having and our feelings and needs and what we wanted. And we recognized we had the same need. We wanted to be able to understand each other. And now, if you've ever sat in a meeting with Clayton and I in the same meeting, he's like my ground control and my co-pilot. He will step up and just like slow me down, because I'm a fast talker, in case you haven't noticed. He'll slow me down. He'll summarize for me when I'm using too many words. He's like got the strengths that I don't have. And now we are such a solid team. I rely on him for so many things. And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't pulled in NBC, if I hadn't slowed things down to recognize this relationship is not getting me what I want. This sucks. So if you aren't convinced how powerful this stuff is, reach out to Clayton, because he'll tell you, like, those conversations were so frustrating, so frustrating. And now Clayton, like I said, he's like my co-pilot and my ground control. If you think about relationships that maybe have just kind of merely existed for years at IQ, well, there's a lot of people who've worked a long time, and there's a lot of history behind relationships. You can actually use this type of communication to bring up like, oh, I notice I feel like disheartened because I actually really want to know more about you and I've never spent the time. Would you be willing to, like, I don't know, have a coffee chat? This language really shows up really useful in that way. Okay. But like I said, this doesn't come naturally. I don't know how many people are like cringing a little as I'm using some of these phrases, and it does take a while to get your own style of what feels natural, so bear with me. But like I said, it doesn't come naturally because instead of coming from feelings like, oh, I feel frustrated, or oh, I feel really discouraged, we usually come from blame or judgment. Either of ourselves, we'll blame ourselves, like, oh, I really shouldn't have said that. Or we'll blame others. Oh, like they, you know, that defensiveness. So when it comes to feelings, there's a few points that help to isolate if, like, hey, am I missing it? Am I, like, is this really a feeling, or is this about someone else? So when we think about when the words that you're saying, so when we think about, I feel I am being cheated, or I feel I'm being misunderstood is another one. When we think about those words, it's like, that's about someone else, right? When the words can be replaced with like a behavior or thinking, it's like, I think I'm being cheated, right? It's not really a feeling. That's about an interpretation of how someone is behaving towards you. See how tricky that is? Think of it like misunderstood. I'm being misunderstood. Well, that's you taking the viewpoint of knowing how well someone understands you, unless you can specifically say, when you say those words, I don't think you understand me. But that's not a feeling. So we're really bad at getting to the feeling and just letting it be about a feeling. You know, I feel frustrated. You really hurt me is another one, because you frustrate me. You really hurt me. You made me mad. You made me happy. That's projecting your experience and putting that expectation on someone else, right? How many times have you sat in an emotion or in a meeting and you've noticed some emotional response happening, right? And sometimes you go and you look to the thing that you noticed and you say, that's the reason. It's their fault. I feel this way because of what they did. When really, when we'll get to it, you feel this way because of some unmet need. You're just having a feeling. They're just a signal to something. So we're really not great at explaining our feelings. We're much better at passing blame or passing responsibility. I want to spend a moment on this because when we do some breakouts, it's easy to get caught up in the thoughts and blame behind feelings, because that's kind of what we're used to doing. So we're going to want to watch for that. Instead of saying like, you really hurt me, just to kind of close this one up, you'd say, I felt hurt, right? I feel this. I'm not going to put that on you. This is just what's happening. This is my experience. That explains your feelings, and then you can explore them. So when we look at, here's 3 words on your screen, and let's do a thumbs up emoji if you think that encouraged is not a feeling. We're finding which one is not a feeling. So if you think encouraged is not a feeling, put up a thumbs emoji. Okay, if you think pleased is not a feeling, put up an emoji. Okay, if you think ignored is not a feeling, I think I'm being ignored, put up There we go. Yeah. See, it's super tricky. Yeah, right? It's super tricky. Ignored is an interpretation of what someone's doing. You would feel frustrated, irritated, disheartened, discouraged. You could feel a whole bunch of things when someone doesn't return an email, an action you interpret as ignoring you. But ignored is not a feeling. Okay, so that was your first test. You did great. You did great. It is tricky. It is very, very tricky. Okay, so that's feelings. Expressing needs. The same goes with expressing needs. We tend to blame others for not meeting our needs when we've probably never made it really clear what we needed. You know, when I lay in bed and Fia wants to tell me something and I'm like, I don't really talk to anyone until I've had my coffee. And I'm totally hinting at what she's supposed to do. And she totally knows it, but she also knows how we talk and how to ask for what you need. And so she calls me out on it. We're not really great at asking for what we need. So instead of I'm angry because you didn't do the thing I expected you to do, right? I'm angry because you didn't get that task completed. See how that places blame? I'm angry because you. NVC associates the feeling to the unmet need, and then it's going to make the space so that you can get your need met, right? So instead, it might be, I feel angry because I need to depend on my team members to follow through on what they said. That's the need. I need dependability, reliability, consideration. That's the need. And so learning how to express our needs rather than place blame. And what happens when we work from this place of feelings and needs is that we step out of judging, blaming, complaining, comparing, shoulding, and we get to better understand our own needs and each other's, which is really quite a process to better understand our own needs and our team members and those of the teams we work with. Okay, so let's try again. Which one expresses a need? How about a thumbs up if it's the one on the left and a clapping if it's the one on the right? Which one expresses a need? Yeah, right, yeah. She makes me angry when she won't reply to my emails. That would be placing blame, right? I feel angry because it's important to me that I can get my work done quickly. And I can't do that when I don't get the response from her within 48 hours. You see how this kind of flips it around? And I can tell you that this doesn't come naturally, and it requires a lot of reflection and intention. Yesterday, there's a question asked of like, do we get less defensive as we get older? And it's no, we get less defensive as we get more intentional. When we get more intentional about communicating this way, we get better at it. Because when we're looking at these feelings that come up, like negative feelings as an example, really what it is an unmet need. And since we're not really great at asking for what we want, typically we express ourselves in a way that's not positive, sometimes gets defensiveness, and it's really just a tragic expression of an unmet need. It's what best we know so far. We're all meeting our needs through our own behavior, right? And when someone is not meeting your need, it's because they're meeting one of their own. And so when you can think like, oh, that's so strange, like why didn't they show up on time? That doesn't meet my need for like consistency or dependability. It's like, oh, they're meeting their need for like calm, like easy pace. They have their own needs. Okay. So remember there were 4 things, right? Observations, feelings, needs, and the final part is making a request. Asking for what would resolve your tension, very familiar language. I'm telling you, there's overlap between all these models. Asking what would resolve your tension in order to help you have to move forward, to live a fuller life, to be more enriched, to make things easier, better, so you can be more productive, so you can show up as your best self. What would get you what you need? And a fundamental part of this is that when you make a request, you're doing it without it being a demand. You really have to check your own intention on this, because lots of times you're asking someone to do something and you fully expect they better do it, right? And with that little intention, that typically comes out in your tone, and it's not really what NVC is about, the compassionate connection. So I want you to is a demand, instead of would you be willing to is a request, or would you consider is a request. This might sound familiar for people in like proposals and objection or and tacticals with tensions and resolving them. Does that get you what you need? is a great language to just make sure that people are getting what they want and what they need to be successful. So when you're in a conversation, think about what would fill your need in that moment. What requests do you have? And actually that part is kind of hard in a lot of conversations. It's actually knowing what do I need right now? I've got some stuff going on, but I actually don't know what I need. Using demand language or should language. I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you do like tell someone like, go do this, it's very likely to result in defensiveness or people not wanting to do what you've asked. I have Sophia again, she's excellent at communication. I told her last weekend, I was like, can you go clean up the kitchen? And she was just like, Mom, I was just gonna do it. And now that you told me I don't want to do it, like when you tell me to do something I was already gonna do, I don't wanna do it anymore. And I remember when being a kid and having that same feeling, and it's actually still true as adults, when someone tells you that, kind of takes away your freedom of choice and your autonomy. And so we actually don't want to do what we're told to do. Funny. So those are pros and cons, I guess, of raising kids with like this communication style. Is I get called out all the time, but Mom, you're supposed to ask for what you need. Recovery model, not a perfection model. So when making a request, it's important to use positive present language. So what that means is it's what you want to have happen, not what you don't want. And it's something that the person can respond to in the moment with a yes or a no, right? Would you be willing to consider showing up on time next time? Yeah, I'd be willing to consider that, right? I'll consider it. Would you be willing to send me the email right after work? Yep, I can do that. So you want to ask of someone what they can respond yes or no to in that moment. So there's 3 types of requests, really. Like it does kind of get kind of basic here. There's 3 things that a person would really be asking of someone else. 2 of them are requests for connection, which is really, really important. And 1 is for action, which is also important, but you can't usually get to the action if you don't have the connection. So the first connection type is a request to be understood, the basic need to be understood. And that's a request for empathy. Do you get me? Do you know what I'm about? Do you know what I'm trying to tell you? And that can come from a question like, are you willing to tell me what you heard me say? It's a really great closed loop on any conversation. I can't tell you the number of times that I'm working with someone, we're doing some coaching on communication, and it's like, well, I told them that. Like, and what did they hear you say? And it's like the miscommunication, it's just a broken communication chain, but it's just because there's an expectation that they understood what you were sending. So this quick question of like, for empathy, for understanding, can really improve communication breakdowns. Second one for connection is a request to understand. So the first one is to be understood. The second one is to understand, right? So this is where, are you willing to share what's coming up for you? I want to know what's going on for you. If you've ever been in a conversation where you said something and it was hard to say, you expected that it brought some stuff up for someone else, and you didn't know how to explore it or give them space to explore kind of like what the reaction was. This language is really great to show you care. It's like, I want to know what's happening for you after I just shared that with you. Would you be willing to share what's coming up for you? How did that land? Again, this language might sound really foreign. It sounds really natural to me now, but I can tell you if someone was telling me this like 4 years ago that I would ever be talking like this, I would have laughed but now it feels natural to me. And it's really, really useful because if you give people space, like when I said to Clayton, would you be willing to share what's happening for you? Suddenly he was able to just like, oh, this is so frustrating. I'm like, yeah, it is. And then we come to connection, right? And finally, the third request is for a specific action. This is where you're like, you want someone to change behavior or do something, right? So it's vocalized as something that, like I said, they can respond to in the moment, yes or no. It's positive based, so what you want them to do, not what you don't want them to do. So would you be willing to let me know in the future if you aren't able to deliver on your expectations? Would you be willing to take the steps that we've talked about your performance and the way that you're impacting the team? Can you tell me what you heard me just say, right? This language is really, really useful for dealing with performance, with expectations, with like raising the bar. When you learn how to use it in your own voice, it will feel more natural, I promise. So what are you wanting that you're not receiving? It's just a great question. People just aren't often taught to ask for what they want. And unmet needs lead to really, like when your needs aren't being met, it's quite unrewarding, right? Quite unfulfilling. So as a leader, as someone in a leadership position, or even on a team and knowing how this works, you have an opportunity to create space for someone else. And because people aren't familiar with this type of communication style, if we have a whole bunch of people around iQmetrix who know how to create space for other people, that's pretty powerful, right? Our collaboration skills are gonna go through the roof. The tricky thing about making a request is that you, like I said, you really do have to mean it as a request, that you believe that we're all here doing the best we can, and we have a desire to support each other. We want to help each other. So understanding that when someone isn't fulfilling your need, when they're not fulfilling a request of yours, there's probably a reason behind it. Every behavior has a reason. And that them fulfilling your request is them not meeting one of their needs. And so becomes the conversation. Oh, I noticed that you haven't been able to send me, the report that I needed. What's getting in the way for you? So before we hop into breakouts, if you're starting to think of some scenarios in your mind of kind of like when things didn't go quite as you needed, when you didn't get something from a conversation, right? You're in this conversation and you leave and you just feel unresolved. That's typically the experience. It's like you just feel unresolved. It didn't meet your needs, or you're in an event, you're in a meeting, you're in an experience, you don't get what you need. On page 20 of your workbook, you can just jot some of those down, some of those scenarios down, and you can explore them through this model later. Okay, so we talked about the 4 pieces through the lens of our own feelings, needs, and requests, and that's part of the magic. But where it gets really, really powerful, especially as a leader of a team or a family or in a community, is when we start tuning in to what others are feeling and needing, right? When we can tune down that noise, just turn it down a little bit and listen for what they're really, really needing in that moment. You're standing with someone and you're like, I'm noticing your body language seems tense. Are you needing some space to think about this for a while? Should we take a break? When we imagine what others are observing, we start to build a connection with them, right? And then we start to think about, well, I wonder what they're feeling and needing right now. What's going on in their world? What's happening for them? And then when we're listening to what they're requesting, you have an opportunity to help someone to be better, to show up as their best self, to have a better experience that's going to contribute more, that's going to have a more enriched life. Like, that's the opportunity in this. And this type of conversation can go back and forth, right? Like from back and forth as you're experiencing what needs and uncovering them. So while it's really natural to internalize this, right, and think about, okay, what am I feeling and needing? What am I feeling and needing? And that is useful, but I might argue that it's even more powerful to turn it around to be listening for feelings and needs. When you see a behavior, when you have an observation, to go and like, oh, I wonder what they were needing in that. Where did that come from? What are they feeling and needing? What need are they meeting from that? And you can just be a more effective communicator and leader because of it. When we use this model, we can start by either expressing ourselves. Here's what's coming up for me. When I saw this happen, this is how I felt, and this is what I'm needing. Would you be willing? Or you can start by listening empathically to what someone else is feeling and needing, right? These 4 pieces of information. And it's really important to keep in mind that this is not a formula. This is not, although you're seeing it and like, here I observe, I feel, I need a request. It's not a formula. Sometimes you're just gonna go to like, what are you needing? What is your request here? Here's what I'm needing. Sometimes you're gonna use like feelings and needs. Sometimes you're gonna need that observation to really help someone understand your world. It's not a formula. And it is important to adapt it to different situations as well as your style. So, there's different ways to say what you're needing, right? Like, because I need is one of them. I value, or I hope for, I wish for, I dig. I don't know who says that, but maybe one of you. That's not my language. Maybe it will be in 4 years from now, but it's not my language today. I care about, I'm happy if, or we can talk like, oh, you know, like control means a lot to me, or efficiency is really important to me, right? There's a whole bunch of ways to express your needs and that other people are expressing their needs. So you don't have to use the language as it's laid out. In fact, even though it's referred to as like a process or a language, it's actually possible to express all 4 pieces of the model without uttering a single word. And I thought about having us do this because I've done this type of exercise before in breakouts where you like have to tune into an emotional experience and not say anything, but we're not going to do that today, so you're welcome. The essence of NVC is just found in holding in our awareness, our consciousness, these 4 parts, that they exist, right? And you don't need the actual words to be exchanged. It just means thinking about those 4 things, observations, right? What do I see? What do I hear? What do I notice happening? Feelings. What feelings are existing in the moment? What feelings are happening right here? And getting really good at feelings. We'll talk about vocabulary in a moment. What needs are being met or not being met? And what requests? What would make things better here? What would create a great experience here? Okay, that's all my talking. We're now doing breakouts. Here we go. So we spent time on learning the 4 parts of nonviolent communication model, right? There's observation, feeling, need, request. And we're going to spend the rest of the time practicing. So remember when you said that you wanted to be able to take something immediately after here and be able to practice it? So that requires the intentional practice, because I guarantee if you're not practicing it, it's very hard to do it after. And this is the commitment part to the practice. So it'll be fun because we made it really easy for you. So we're on page 14. We're going to hop into breakouts and we're going to focus on observations without evaluation. So in your workbooks, page 14, you have some statements. So as a group, you're going to go through them and you're going to decide, is this an observation or is it an observation with a bit of a judgment in there, or a bit of an evaluation in there? And if it does have an evaluation, just rewrite it without. Just make it a basic observation. And when you're done the examples as a team, try to come up with 3 scenarios that are real to you, relevant to you. You know, where maybe you were adding an evaluation or a judgment into an observation. And then we'll come back after 7 minutes. Ready? So we're going to go off to the observation lab. Okay. So anyone find that a little tricky to like separate observation or evaluation, or did I give you some that are like pretty like obvious? There's a few in there that are a little tricky, hey?
We only got through 3 of them.
Okay, that's okay. The workbooks persist forever. Persist forever.
Some were obvious, but like super hard to make it non.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Imad. And one thing, so as we're doing this, give yourself creative flexibility to make shit up, because you can't possibly know, right? Like what actually happened or what behavior actually happened. So you get to be the writer of this story to say like, you know, so you are too generous as an example. That's an evaluation, right? So you might say, when you give away all of the money in your wallet, then I think that you're too generous. We could get more specific even, but just to keep it simple, the team's procrastinating around this decision. It's like, well, that's kind of an evaluation about what a team is doing, but it might be that, you know, the team hasn't made a decision in 3 weeks, like they'd said they would, right? That's very specific. It's not really about putting a comparison or an evaluation on their behavior. It's just like, hey, they said they would make a decision and they have not. You're arguing with me for the 4th time this week. That's an observation, right? Although there might be something in like arguing as debatable, depending on the context of like, is it really clear they're arguing, or did you assign meaning to the tone of their voice that they didn't have, right? This is like those nuances, and you're not going to get it wrong. NVC is really interesting in that you can say like, oh, are you feeling frustrated because you have a need for me to be on time? And if you're wrong, they'll just say like, no, I'm mad. Okay, let's explore that, right? Like it's okay to get it wrong. You'll just keep tweaking to get it right. It's a recovery model, not a perfection model. Sam didn't ask for my opinion during the meeting. That could be taken as an observation, right? If there wasn't a question asked, that's something that multiple people could have that same observation. It's one of like the filters to put it through. Tim said that it wasn't the right direction. Again, that's an observation because those are words that someone said. And if that's a quote, it's not the right direction, everyone in the room would have had that same observation. And that's a good filter to put them through, is like, if every single person you know would have said the same thing, they saw and observed the same thing, then it's likely an observation. If you've assigned meaning, like they're sarcastic, and someone else has a totally different story about that person, they're like, oh, they're being funny. Like, right? That's, you can, if you can't put it through that filter of like everyone in the room would have had that same experience, you've likely put some sort of comparison, an evaluation, a criticism, or a judgment in the sentence. Okay. So that's observations and evaluations. Next, we're going to hop out into feelings. So we're going to spend time separating feelings from thinking, right? And this was a tricky one. And again, like, it's okay. It is a tricky skill to gain, and just getting a little better is like really, really useful. So we talked about the feeling of ignored, remember before, and how feeling ignored is actually something you're projecting of what someone's doing to you. Instead, you might feel discouraged or disheartened. Oh yeah, I even show them to you again. So I feel ignored when you don't care about our meetings. I feel discouraged when you cancel our meetings, right? I feel like discouraged when you do this thing. Okay, so on to page 15, our list of statements. Decide as a group whether that's a feeling or a thought trying to be expressed as a feeling. And these can get tricky, and just rewrite them as feelings. There is on the next page an inventory of feelings, which I recommend that you use forever, but it's there if you want to pull some feelings. And also there's a spot for you to get to 3 examples. And if you find it more useful to do your own examples, start there as a group with, and rewrite them as feelings. So check out the inventory of feelings on the next page. You're headed to page 15, back into our breakouts. Okay, how was that? Usually what I find when I'm teaching this is that one of the most limiting elements is that we don't have a very big feelings vocabulary. Like, we're really Dr. Seussy, right? We're sad, mad, glad, bad. Like, that's really all we have. And so I actually, in our house, we have the feelings and needs inventories are in our cupboard in our kitchen. I actually have them above my computer as well. So if you wonder why I point that way, and it's because we just don't learn that many words to explain our feelings, and there's so many. And when we start to build that vocabulary, we actually have a richer experience to be like, oh, I'm feeling really disheartened right now. It's like, I could just say sad, but I'm feeling disheartened. So, or I feel like, I'm feeling really excited, or I'm feeling thrilled. Like, how great is thrilled compared to excited? Excited is so overused. Like, I'm thrilled. So yeah, let's go through these. Does anyone have any that they got like stuck on? Anyone want to have a share here?
Yeah, the first one right out of the gate, boom. Like I feel something when I think you don't like me, but I'm lacking that vocabulary.
Right. So it's like, I feel disheartened, or I feel disappointed when you don't smile at me in the hallway. I feel sad when you don't, smile at me. I feel sad when you don't wave at me. What else we got in our sad bucket? We've got dejected, forlorn. I don't think I'd ever use that one. Hopeless, heavy-hearted. That's a good one. I feel heavy-hearted when you don't smile at me, right? It's like, yeah, that's the feeling. Ugh. I feel good about, so yeah, I feel you is not a feeling. So good catch on that. I feel good about what you did for me there. I'm going to debate that good is not a feeling word. You could use it, but like, it's pretty, good and bad, or let's try a little harder and really get to an actual feeling there, which is like, you might feel excited or proud, or like, we can do better than good. But if you said it's a feeling, you can, it's fine. I feel irritated when you talk over me. Irritated is a feeling. And when you talk over me, that becomes like it's something you can actually observe happening. So you're kind of in that gray area of like, I feel this way when you have this behavior. Like if you said, you make me irritated, that's where the language gets flipped, right? I feel misunderstood. I think I've been trying to like covering where that kind of falls apart, right? I feel discouraged when I think you don't understand me. Right? That's where we separate the language and the blame. I feel impatient when the meeting topic goes off track. Yeah, impatient is a feeling. If we were saying like, you make me impatient, that's kind of where we're placing blame and not really getting to the feeling. Any questions about the feeling one? Anyone? Is that all making sense? Because guess what we're gonna do again? breakouts again, there's 4 parts. So we start to come together and we're moving through these 4 pieces, right? Observations, feelings, guess what's next? Needs. So again, we're not trained to express ourselves this clearly. We're more likely to judge, to use passive aggressive language, or to not ask for what we need, which essentially means that when you're experiencing any type of feeling in any interaction, when you're experiencing any feeling, it's because of a need that has been met or unmet. Every feeling arises from some need not being met or unmet, right? So when people are expressing their feelings, to get to like, oh, what's the need under there? Whether they're like excited, there's a need that's like being fulfilled, or they're, angry, there's a need that's not being fulfilled. So I'm really trying to make that connection of like, when you feel something, it's probably because there's an unmet need or a met need. When someone else is feeling something, they also have that. So when you're in a conversation with someone and they're tensing up or blaming or judging or shoulding, should is one of the most emotionally expensive words that you can imagine. It just drains all the energy out and does nothing to serve a relationship. So shoulding is, in my opinion, one of the most expensive words. If people are comparing or just denying responsibility, or any of what we actually call, it's called a life alienating language. I'll talk more about that, but what's happening is it's a tragic expression of an unmet need. And so as a lead, as a team member who's gone through this, when you notice that behavior, you're starting to listen for like, oh, they have an unmet need and they don't know how to express it. I'm just gonna pause for a second. And I'm thinking about Will Hunt. I don't know if he's on this one. I don't know if he could make it today, but he has the ability to, so when we were in Mexico, I leaned on him because he doesn't speak Spanish fluently, but he can hear it and he can pull out the words to know what's being said, right? So if Spanish is your second language, but you're not fluent in it, or you're just kind of like playing in it, or you know a few of the words, you can like hear a bunch of words from someone that's their first language, and you can pull it out and know what they're saying. So listening for feelings and needs is very similar, but it's in your first language, and it's way more important because most people don't know how to use the words that actually express what's going on for them. So when we can get really good at like hearing a whole slew of words coming at you and being able to like tune out like the noise and to be like, oh, I wonder if this is what they're feeling. I wonder if this is what they're needing. I'm hearing these feelings and needs. And when you get really good at knowing the feelings and needs vocabulary, you start to like, because there's basic, like there's just kind of a basic set of needs, right? It's like, oh, I wonder if their need for a choice is not being met. And you start to be able to pull that out no matter what is being said to you. And this is where that defensiveness, like if you can step out and you have like a high amount of self-acceptance and you're in a good solid place and you're not getting defensive, people can say whatever they want at you. And you're just like, oh, I know what's happening here. I know what's happening here. Let me hear. So being able to recognize the emotional experience and how that's filling another person up or leaving them unfulfilled is a gift in any relationship, but it's a necessity in a leader. I think we covered this week as well. You've heard, I think it was Dr. Laura's session where she was talking about like the emotional experience. That's either going to support someone's success or impede their success, right? So we are feelings, we're an emotional being and we can't escape it. That's just how we are. And so when we can help people to express their needs and have their needs met, they'll have a positive emotional experience and they'll actually show up as their best self and give more to the team and more to their relationships. It's just like this ripple effect, but it does take practice, right? So let's practice. Let's hop into breakouts and listen for needs. So in the workbook, again, is a list of phrases. And at the bottom or the next page is a list of needs. So it's an inventory. And again, these are really good to keep forever. And as a group, just run through the list of needs that are being expressed in each statement. So this is where you're trying to like listen with that, like, the first language, English, your second language of NVC, you're pulling out those needs. And then if you have time, think of a few statements that maybe have been charged with emotion. Maybe you got caught off guard or something came out of you that was charged with emotion, and write those down and be like, oh, what need wasn't being met in that moment? All right, you ready? Off we go. Anyone getting better at listening for feelings and needs? Yeah, maybe some judgments and evaluations are coming in there too. You're like, wait a second, I'm seeing something here, right? So just to quickly go through them, I want to get through at least one more breakout, but just to go through them. So, we're looking at needs, and this is where like you don't necessarily know what need it is when you're like hearing someone, but you can just ask like, oh, You know, you are always, my apologies for a typo, you're always judging other people, right? If someone's saying that, it's likely that, you know, their need for respect or for consideration or for love isn't being met because they're seeing someone else being judged. Doesn't it bother you that the other team don't care about the work they dump on us, right? So maybe that's like a need, again, to be considered, or for harmony, for equality, right? Those needs not being met. You broke your promise, need for integrity or honesty. Sometimes I'm so selfish. Depends what context this is said in. Again, this is where you get to make shit up to decide, you know, there's not a lot of wrong answers here. But maybe it's a need for independence or to be understood. You know, someone's just wanting to be validated. Save your breath because I'm doing what I damn well please. This could be a need for respect, to want to feel respected, freedom of choice, a need to feel secure or to matter, significant. You'll notice some of these words come in. People here are very cliquish. This could be a sense of belonging or inclusion, like inclusivity is important. And so someone saying that might not be having their need to see an environment where there's inclusivity. Mom, do you know how stupid you sound when you talk NVC? Quote from my house. A need for authenticity, for connection, because they don't understand it, so it's not connecting for them. No one here listens. A need for harmony, to be heard, right? So we start to see like how these statements are just tragic expressions of unmet needs. Okay. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this exercise, but I do want to, we won't break out into groups for it, but I do want to just spend a moment on requests in a group. So the fourth element of NVC is requests, and that can be one-on-one, which is actually a little bit easier. But when you're sitting in a group environment, it's a lot harder. And what often happens is people will make a statement, and it's not really clear what that person is actually needing or asking for, like I did this morning with my daughter. Or, you know, if someone's in the room and they just say, it gets cold in this room when people leave the door open. If you really listen, there's an unmet need and probably a request in there, right? If it's cold, the door's open, they probably want something to happen, but it's not really said in a way that someone's gonna pick up on that. So, you know, you could probably think of a time where you've been in a meeting or you've been in a conversation and you made a statement because you wanted someone to pick up on it and do something, but you actually didn't make a request. So just like I didn't get my coffee this morning because I didn't ask for it, we can get better at making a request. And when we do that, again, we're making it concrete. So it's a yes or no. We're using positive language, what we want someone to do, not what we want them not to do. And we're framing in a way that the listener can respond in that very moment, right? So something contextual to the present moment. So this might sound like, I'm feeling cold and I'd just like a show of hands from everyone here, like if anyone would object to me shutting the door, right? Thank you, right? So it's like, I'm asking everyone, here's what you can do, and then I'll know how I can get what I need. And someone might object, right? Someone might raise their hand, and it's like, oh, I see that some of you would like the door open. No problem. I'm gonna run and grab my sweater. Thanks. Go on with meeting. I'll be back. Right? And it becomes like you're not sitting there frozen for an entire meeting, right? And then your experience is awful, and you're not contributing. And if you're like me and you're cold, I just get angry. So asking what you need, you can create an environment where you'll be able to contribute more. Okay. We're not going to do the group requests, but in your workbook is a bunch of examples of group requests, statements that are made in a group setting and how you would flip those over into requests. It's not the most important thing. This is life alienating language. So I've alluded to this quite a bit, but what we're talking about here is messages that are expressed in a way that are less likely to inspire connection, cooperation, collaboration, right? This is the language that will get people to be defensive. These are triggers for people. And we're gonna go, so I was mentioning at the very beginning, we're actually gonna go one step further and try to teach ourselves to show up in a way that's less likely to create defensiveness in others. So, you know, I mean, because now we're really good at not being defensive, right, from the session yesterday. But seriously, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be training ourselves to recognize life alienating language, and that's going to do two things. One, we'll be able to hear it and recognize the message as a tragic expression of an unmet need, right? We were just talking about that. And then we can focus on just hearing the needs and feelings and like not getting defensive or not getting upset about the words that are coming at us. Cause we're like, oh, they've got some like really activated emotions happening. I wonder what needs aren't being met. Curiosity really like helps to remove your own defensiveness. And 2, we get to choose our own words more carefully, so that we tend to use more connecting words that result in cooperation and collaboration and are less likely to be received with defensiveness. Stonewalling is another thing that happens when we use the life alienating language. And it's going to move us toward this goal of cooperation. So these 4 Ds can be remembered in terms, there's 4 Ds. So diagnosis, denial, demand, and deserve-oriented language, okay? So diagnosis, judgment, analysis, criticism, comparison, that's when you're going and applying meaning to a behavior. You're deciding, you're analyzing, you're adding a story, you're projecting you're seeing the world, you're seeing their world through your eyes instead of trying to understand what is it for them or leaving space to understand it. Denial of responsibility. You'll notice this language when you hear someone talk about how someone else made them feel. You know, like, they made me so mad, they made me so upset, they made me so frustrated. When we're denying the responsibility for our own feelings and needs, we're not building connection. We're actually placing expectations on someone else for how we feel. Demand. This is that life alienating type of language like I was talking about with my daughter Fia, that pretty much always ends up with defensiveness. Because we have this universal need for autonomy and choice, having someone make demands in a way that doesn't feel like a cooperative environment is going to result in defensiveness. And then deserve-oriented language, this is that shoulding and shouldn'ting, like when you're shoulding all over the place. Like I mentioned, should is a very expensive word. Use it very carefully, because when you're using the word should, you're applying some moralistic judgment or expectation of right and wrong that you've developed from your experience, and you're applying it to someone else. And you can't really, like, it doesn't actually work across the entire planet. Like if you dropped yourself into another country and they're like, well, they should do this, you wouldn't expect the same thing in a different country. But people are different, and unique just the same. And so we catch ourselves with those should feelings. Okay, we're gonna do one more breakout here. And this is where we're gonna go through and just pick out the 4 Ds. This one should only take about 5 minutes, if that's okay, Erin, if we shorten this one, because there's not a lot there. And you're just gonna go and like, which D is it? Is it demand, denial? Is it diagnosis? All right, so into breakouts. Here we go. All right, how is that? Are we starting to notice some of these Ds, some of these 4 Ds of life alienating language, right? And how common it is, how quickly these things just roll off our tongue, like so quickly. So you make me feel frustrated. That would be a denial of responsibility, right? You're telling someone else they're responsible for your feelings. I have to because my lead told me to. That's another denial of responsibility. You actually have a choice. You're doing it because there's a need being met to do it, which is maybe to be competent, maybe to have a job and to be secure. Like you actually have a choice not to do something. You're not doing it because your lead told you to. I have to get my expense claim in today. Again, same thing. You have a need of like, security, financial security, getting paid back, or you want to be dependable. You want to get finance your expense claim so they can do their job. Like that's actually why you're doing it, not because you have to. You should not have done that, right? That's one of those expensive words, the deserve-oriented language. You can't send that email. That would be a demand language, right? You're really like, that's demand language saying you can't do that. The problem with you is that you talk too much. Little bit of a judgment there, a little bit, just a tiny. I do talk too much. So that's one of the reasons I put it there, but I can say it. Okay. So I do want to do one more breakout where we put it all together. Okay, so we broke out for observations, we broke out for feelings, we broke out for needs. I skipped our group breakout for requests. We broke out for the 4 Ds because that's a really important part of designing your language so it's connecting and not creating defensiveness. This is where we put it all together. So this is where you'll also have the opportunity to write a request. So we're going to do just another 7 minutes. We're going to pop out into those breakouts And you're going to go through on page 23, there's some phrases, and you're going to rewrite them to do better versions of the NVC format. Again, like, it's okay if they're not perfect. We're just kind of like tuning up our language. We're getting better at the second language. All right, so let's pop out into those breakouts. The whole parts of it, right? The 4 parts. So just to do a couple of these examples to see how kind of like where you landed. And if you have questions, feel free to, we can focus on a specific one. But so these are tragic expressions of unmet needs, statements people would just say. So like, my lead doesn't do one-on-ones with me, right? The unmet need of being considered. So it might be, I feel discouraged when my lead doesn't book one-on-ones with me, because I have a need to have my voice heard. In that case, that might be a conversation about empathy, right? Would you be willing to, like, how does that land for you, or what comes up for you as you hear me say that? Depends again on the context of the situation. When you're turning like a complaint to a conversation about connection, really, like, they're likely just wanting empathy. We shouldn't have to tell them what to do. You know, so are you feeling frustrated because you have a need for efficiency that's not being met? You know, would you be willing to consider talking to your boss about that, or talking to your manager about that? So you can start to break out these expressions into those 4 parts to get to a place of what you need. Anyone get stuck on any of these that they want us explicitly cover?
We were getting a bit confused about what point of view, like I was saying, yeah, if I'm talking about my lead doesn't do one-on-ones, who am I saying that to?
Right.
Obviously,
yeah.
if you're saying it to your lead, you can rephrase it as a very simple request that I think I'll get a lot of benefit from one-on-ones. Could we schedule one?
Yeah.
But if you're just complaining to another dev on your team,
yeah. Are you, and that's where it comes into, like, you know, if it is a complaint and you're hearing it, you can actually turn it into like, oh, are you needing to have an opportunity to be heard by your lead? You know, maybe consider like telling them, asking them, where you can flip it around. So that really wraps up the intro to NVC. Give me an emoji if you feel like you've got something you can kind of like start playing with, like just a little bit of essence that you can start to play with when we're talking about observations and feelings and needs and requests. Awesome. And how many people here still have questions and want to practice more? Awesome, because you can request to have NVC training through iQU, so you can bring it in right into your team where everybody gets to know it. Shameless plug. So start to make this a part of your conversations, just in how you listen to people, right? It just kind of flips things around when you're in a conversation. What are they needing? What are they trying to say, but they don't know how? If you have kids, this is really, really useful there. If you have a partner, this is really useful. If you're in a community member, your teams, this is really useful to turn it around. What are they needing right now? You're gonna find a deeper understanding. You're gonna have more fun in your disagreements. Clayton, I feel so frustrated right now. Me too. Legitimately more fun. And you're gonna create less defensiveness in yourself and others, right? Not every conversation needs to be an NVC conversation. Like I said, if we all start walking around saying like, I feel this, I need this, would you? It's gonna be super strange. But when you notice a feeling or an emotional reaction, you can start listening for those unmet needs. So there you have it. You're ready to head off to tune into those feelings that happen when you observe something, figure out what's needed, and then ask for what you need. Any questions? That's all. Feel free to reach out if you do have questions. I could talk about this stuff all day, as you can see, because I went 20 minutes over. My apologies on the time. Thanks for your attention and participation. Have a great afternoon.